After an injury sidelined and ended Logan Stanley's start to the season, he's finally just about ready to return to action. Should the Jets call upon him or continue with Fleury? Let's chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you enjoy what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, the Jets have some action coming up this weekend. They'll face the Sharks first tomorrow night, and then the Pittsburgh Penguins over the weekend. Although we're probably not seeing McGroarty, so our long-awaited harassment of his return to the Jets is going to have to be sided table to the side for now, just a little bit longer. So we'll see about when that reunification happens at some point in the future. But in the meantime, the Jets may be getting back some reinforcements in Logan Stanley, who is actually practicing in a regular jersey today, from what I hear. And, if that's the case, the Jets could be getting some reinforcements. But I guess the biggest question is, should Logan Stanley actually draw back in, especially if he is actually ready to go by 8 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, which I think some people have mixed thoughts on his performances. You probably know where I stand on Stanley. If this is your first time listening, I tend to be more in the mixed category. I think a lot of Stanley's game hasn't really translated in the way that you might expect at the NHL level, but we'll get to that in just a quick moment. Before we go any further, did want to shout out our friends and partners at Gametime. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Just download the Gametime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, like I said about Stanley, I think when he was drafted, a lot of people saw his size and thought, oh, that guy's going to be a big shutdown D. The Stanimal, Stanzilla, whatever you want to call him, just Stanley if you feel like it. He actually doesn't play that kind of game at all. And in fact, I think he's really been miscategorized throughout much of his career, in part because people see the 6'7" stature and the big physical hits that he actually can throw, and they imagine that he's a big shutdown, stay-at-home kind of player. But that's not really been his game. He's kind of at his best when he's actually carrying the puck, which is not something that I think I ever would have expected to say. And look, I don't think that Stanley's like an elite top pairing Erik Karlsson type, but when he shows those flashes of confidence with puck control inside the offensive zone, when he's skating along the blue line perimeter and creating space before taking a shot or maybe passing it off to a line mate, you see shades of a different kind of player than what I think a lot of people have sort of ascribed to him. The problem with his physicality is that because he's so big, he actually struggles in the corners. If he's not pinning somebody directly against the wall, usually the smaller skaters get around him or they knock him off balance because he's trying to pivot, and he can't really pivot that quickly. It's not that he's like the worst defender anyone's ever seen, but I think you kind of can tell when he's struggling to make those markings, to have those quick reads. He's the sort of player who needs to anticipate the play more than he actually does, because he's not fast enough to turn and react when somebody gets an inside step on him. So for me, I think I wouldn't mind him having, the seventh defender role on this team, it's a good spot to have for him because he's being paid a decent amount of cash, and he'll actually get some spot starts, I'm sure, at some point. But for the most part, Hayden Fleury's been fine, and I'm kind of inclined to just continue as is. I doubt that's what the Jets are going to do because Hayden Fleury's being paid a lot less, and he is likely going to the Moose at some point in the near future. But in my mind, I think he's been, reasonable enough to where I don't really feel like you need to make a switch. And, for me, when Stanley was extended, I kind of had a question about what his role was going to be, because to be honest, I just don't really see a spot for him in the starting six, which, as a third pairing defender, maybe he'd be okay alongside Miller, but I think against better teams, you've seen the sort of player that Stanley is. And again, as like a third pairing defender, yeah, I mean, it is what it is, right? Every team in some capacity has a player who maybe struggles a little more than some of the other guys. With Stanley, he can actually have just some straight up bad games, but it is what it is. I think, Winnipeg is still trying to make the most of his draft pick, and it's fine. I understand why they would do that, but, for me personally, I just don't think it's really the best use of the roster. And in this case, because Fleury's not really had too many issues, I wouldn't mind staying the course for this once. In some areas, maybe you could improve upon Fleury, but that's kind of why Heinola coming back in a few weeks is in my mind a more impactful return. But even against weaker teams, I don't know that you want to have Stanley in there. That sort of leads maybe a little bit into our next chat, which is that the San Jose Sharks are actually not that bad this year. I think Winnipeg would be doing itself a disservice to maybe underestimate an opponent like the Sharks. I know San Jose is rebuilding, and technically the Jets should be taking care of business at home, but the Sharks lineup and what they've done offensively, at least, has been a big improvement. So Stanley, I don't think is really going to help in this case. Logan, I would rotate him in against maybe some weaker teams, maybe some squads like Chicago that aren't really generating that much offense. I wouldn't really feel comfortable putting him against higher octane offenses like, the Sharks, the Penguins, and a few others. So for me, Fleury, he's done fine enough. I would just keep him there. Now, an interesting thing I did notice in the comments from our last episode, folks have kind of talked a little bit about the third line, which is, it's not the Lowry line. I have to reinforce this point that the Lowry line is basically the second line. It is not a third line. It doesn't play. It actually plays quite more than a third line. So the real third line is the Nemesnikov line, and people have said it's his wingers that are the problem, and that's only partially true. I think the problem with Nemesnikov is that, Perfetti and Ehlers are both trying to create in transition, or in Perfetti's case, trying to, slow the game down and attack the slot area. But Nemesnikov hasn't really been winning the physical battles and stuff and ended up in the right places where he typically was last year. I think when he had good chemistry and he was figuring things out alongside Perfetti last season, he was able to crash the crease. He was getting into the slot area, and he was winning his physical duels, especially along the walls, a lot more frequently. This year, that's not really happening as much. I don't know what's going on with him. He just seems like he's lost maybe a bit of his step. And, his wingers are trying to create in their own ways. And already, that Ehlers and Perfetti just don't really play that well together. I think you can kind of force it, but stylistically, there's just a mismatch. And I think Nemesnikov has had issues trying to improvise in that scenario. So, I just think you have three guys that don't really fit together anymore. Whatever chemistry they may have had last season between, Nemesnikov and Perfetti, it just seems like no one's really on the same page. No one's really working that well. But I think Vlad in particular has struggled to make the sort of impact that he had in his forechecking role. And if that continues, that could be a problem because he's a guy that the Jets really rely upon. You see shades and flashes of what he did last year, but so far it just seems like it's been a little bit more tougher sledding for him, especially because he's being asked to do more. I think with Perfetti and Ehlers not really on the same page, a lot more responsibility is falling on the Nemesnikov's shoulders, and it just doesn't seem like it's really working right now. So if there's a change I would make, I might be looking at that as well. I would certainly do that before changing the defense, which the blue line has been okay so far. I don't think you really need to mess with it yet. I do think it'll be a problem later on once we start facing better teams, but for the time being, you can probably get away with it. Now, I did just say better teams, and, the Sharks offense might actually qualify as a team that could give the Jets some trouble tomorrow. We'll chat about that in just a quick moment, but before we go any further, thought it'd be worth mentioning our friends and partners at FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. For those of you who have followed the first 6 games of the season, it's been very interesting if you're a Ravens fan like me. Intriguing if you're a Bears fan as well, because it's hard to know if the Bears are actually good or if their opponents are just bad. I would lean towards the Bears defense being pretty legit. Not so sure about the offense yet. The Commanders, though, if you're a Commanders fan, you're enjoying life. You've had a great start to the season, much better than you would have ever have expected. Probably the same for Vikings fans. I don't think anyone thought the Vikings D was going to be as good as it is, but it's pretty locked tight. They're having a pretty good run so far. And if you're a Jets fan, all I can say is I'm sorry and good luck. I hope Devontae Adams is a little more fun for you than some of the alternatives. But maybe you're watching one of these teams, you're getting a hunch in the middle of the game. Maybe you think you might know who is going to win the Super Bowl. Well, if you want to back that up, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. And you'll even get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's all with FanDuel.com. Hey friends, welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're just chatting ahead of a couple of games this weekend. The first opponent the Jets are going to be facing is San Jose tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern. And the Sharks this year are actually not as bad as you might think. Now, look, let's get this right off the bat. Their defense is bottom of the league. Zero question, they are one of the most porous blue lines in the NHL. So in that respect, yes, they are very bad. But when it comes to their offense, they've actually been producing at a surprisingly decent clip. This is an attacking unit that I think is much improved compared to where it was in previous years. And I'm not going to say that it's particularly good, but the Sharks are actually not last in the Pacific. The Oilers currently are, but the Sharks are only 2 points behind 5th place, which again, these teams have only played 3 or 4 games, so don't get too excited. But I think the Sharks are not as bad as they've been in years prior. This is a team that has a much improved forward lineup, and based on what we're seeing so far, there's pending injuries. William Eklund, Mikael Granlund, and Tyler Toffoli on your first line. I think Eklund may have something going on, so I don't know if he's going to draw in tomorrow, but if he is, he's been pretty dangerous. Obviously, the whole injury to Celebrini is a huge blow. That, I think, was just a devastating loss after the first game or so. But even without Celebrini, that top line is still passable. Obviously, our old friend Tyler Toffoli signed with San Jose this offseason. Very interesting that he ended up with a rebuilder, but I think his speed and stuff at his age maybe meant it was a little harder to convince other teams to take him on. The second line is very sneaky, though. You've got Kostin, Venberg, and Zetterlund. This is a surprisingly competent trio. Now, I think as a third line, you'd like them a little more than a second line, but if you're looking at this from a San Jose perspective, you're just looking to give some solid depth around Celebrini to make the team a little more, competitive. Not necessarily playoff competitive, mind you, but just a more exciting offense, a team that actually resembles more of an NHL roster. And I think the second line is exactly that. It's a lot stronger than it was in previous years. I think this top 6 is relatively functional. It's not great, but compared to what they've been icing the past couple of seasons, the Sharks are not as much of a pushover as they were before. Your third line is Gaudreau, Will Smith, and Kunin. Smith has, I think, been decent. I haven't been following him that closely, but I've got some Sharks friends who have been very high on him ever since he was drafted. He does do the does do the Recker McGroarty thing of wearing number 2 at forward, which is just really weird. I really don't like seeing number 2 as a forward. I know it's just very silly, but for me, I always look at that as like a blue liner number. So seeing it on a forward, especially a center or something like that, is just a little strange to me. But hey, more power to him, I guess. Your fourth line, it's Grundstrom, Sturm, and Dellandrea. Not much there that I think the Jets would worry about. The Kupari line's probably going to win that matchup pretty handily, so I wouldn't stress too much. But I think the thing to keep in mind with this team is that they're producing pretty well at 5v5 offensively. It's just the big problem for them kind of happens when you look at the back end. Their defense right now, you probably would not guess their top pairing, but if you do know it, it's Wallman and Ceci, which is just, A top pairing of Wallman and CC doesn't really feel very top pairing to me. That looks more like a generously a third pairing, if I'm being honest. Wallman had a stretch where he was pretty decent, but CC is one of those guys that is much maligned and honestly probably has earned a bit of the reputation. He's big, he's physical, and that doesn't really help him when it comes to making those defensive reads, sealing those passing lanes down, and just generally being a defensive nuisance. If anything, he's a defensive nuisance more to his own team. So that's a pairing the Jets should probably rip apart. Same thing for Ferraro and Ruda. These guys have struggled and, asked to be a second pairing, probably not something that you're going to get much out of from that duo. Your third pairing is Thrun and Benning. Honestly, this might be the stronger pairing of any of these, which is not really saying much because all of them are not particularly great. But I guess if you're the Sharks, you're not trying to win necessarily. If you just make it exciting enough but still lose, that's probably about as good as just outright tanking. So, this team, I think, offensively is definitely missing some big names. You're missing guys like, Celebrini, Eklund maybe out tomorrow. But this team is more of a pest than it looks. And, Vanacek and Blackwood in net, not really a tandem that I think is going to inspire tons of fear if you're the Jets. But like Winnipeg has struggled to score 5v5 goals this year. And again, it is a 3-game sample, but I think it's notable that it's not that dissimilar from what we saw last year. I will say the top line did actually score considerably more last season, but all that said, the offensive creation being a bit of a problem, I think is still going to be an issue here. So for me, I just look at this Sharks team, and I see a potential trap game for the Jets. Winnipeg really should take care of business, especially at home, but I'm not quite banking on it. So kind of an interesting thought. The Sharks obviously are going to be towards the bottom of the NHL standings this year. I don't think there's any getting around that, and I don't think that they are really upset by that necessarily either, because the plan is really about the future. And, it's really about putting Celebrini in the best position to succeed, which the only way they're really going to be able to do that is by continuing to draft top-end talent. But sometimes the Sharks do make some really puzzling decisions, some bad trades and stuff, so we'll see how that all pans out. But I think for Winnipeg, anything less than like 2 points in this game probably feels like a bit of a disappointment. The Sharks forwards may not be that bad, but the blue line and goaltending, you should actually be able to get by pretty straightforward. So hopefully the Jets' power play is up to snuff. Winnipeg's 5v5 offense, I really do wonder what's going to happen with that. The Jets don't really seem to be intent on making that many changes. And so far with Arniel, I don't really get like world beater vibes from him yet. And again, we don't really know what his full vision for the team looks like exactly, but I don't know. I haven't really been wowed so far. I mean, he's done a solid enough job, but I think for what I want from this team and what I'm sort of expecting the Jets to do, it's just been okay. It's not really been much to write home about. Defensively, a bit of a different story. The Jets have really limited chances against, and they're doing a fantastic job there. But at the end of the day, your defense can only take you so far if you're just not scoring. So, I mean, it's a bit of a catch-22, right? You may seal off opponents, you may lock them down, you may give them no space to breathe, but if you aren't scoring yourself, not really all that helpful. So the Jets will hopefully figure things out very soon. But, of course, the Jets are going to be welcoming a pretty big opponent coming into the weekend. Obviously, this is an opponent that I think a lot of us were hoping to see some Rucker McGroarty action. Obviously, I think fans were expecting to boo him and really harass him, give him a hard time, all of that fun stuff. But he's been sent down, so that doesn't really feel like it's going to be happening this weekend. Bit of a shame. I think a reuniting for Winnipeg and Rucker would have been for a much more fun storyline, especially on Brian Little retirement night. Little's coming back to celebrate, one last Jets experience, a guy who has been loyal to the franchise, who really was a fight for the badge kind of player in a very understated way, I would say, but he definitely loved playing for Winnipeg. He was one of Winnipeg's most underrated players and really an underappreciated part of the Jets offense for many years. There were times where even I don't think I gave him his due credit and his roses, but in hindsight, he was really the ideal second line center. And had that injury not happened, he might have been able to carve out a couple more seasons of his career and really get to retire the way that I think he wanted to, rather than a horrendous injury, really putting him at risk and frankly causing us a lot of heartache. It was a bit stressful when that puck hit him in the side of the head, and I can only imagine what it must have been like for his family and friends. But the good news is he seems to be doing pretty well, and I'm just glad that he's doing much better than that moment, because it was pretty scary, and you never want to see guys get hurt like that. But for a night where he'll be celebrated, it would have been great to have that to show to Rucker what Winnipeg really means to those who actually commit to the team and want to stick around. But I guess we'll just have to wait for that moment until a future game. But the Penguins, in the meantime, as they are, surprisingly annoying team to play against. We'll chat about what makes them dangerous in just a little bit. But before we go any further, did want to mention our friends and partners from earlier in this episode at Gametime. Those of you who have ever bought tickets know that, it often comes with hidden charges, surprise fees, and all that fun stuff. And, you might add a ticket to your cart and, it says $30, but then when you go to check out, it actually says $60, and you're asking yourself, wow, how did that suddenly double in price? Well, like I mentioned, surprise fees, hidden charges, taxes, all that fun stuff. It's just frustrating to not know what you're paying for up front. That's why Gametime offers an option that you can toggle called all-in pricing, so you know exactly what you're paying for before you ever get to your cart. Everyone who has ever had to deal with the hidden charge stuff knows that it just sucks, and Gametime totally agrees. And not only do they offer all-in pricing, but they also offer a new feature called PrizePicks that filters out all the fluff to only show you the most incredible deals on the hottest seats. And best of all, you can even see seat views before you buy. And they come back with the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and so much more. If you somehow find a ticket cheaper for the same seat somewhere else, they will actually give you a credit of 110% of the difference. That's fantastic. It's super great because and you can trust that one way or another, you will always get the best deal possible. Gametime, again, wants you to have fun. They want you to enjoy yourself and always, just get the best price and best deal for the seat that you're after, whether it's an NHL game like the Winnipeg Jets. Maybe you want to go to the World Series in a few weeks. Maybe you're looking for some NBA action. Whatever it is, they've got it there. And if you want to take the guesswork out of buying tickets, download the Gametime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. While we're at it, I also did want to shout out our friends and partners at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is one of the only real money sports action websites out there with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. They have daily fantasy sports that's accessible to everyone, and all you have to do is just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. They invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect, and that even includes injuries, right? We all know that sometimes you have an injury, somebody goes down, it's not a great time. I've personally dealt with this in fantasy football where, one weekend you're feeling great, like you're going to win the league, and the next weekend everyone is on IR, and it's not fun, right? But if your player leaves in the middle of the first half and doesn't return, that's okay. PrizePicks will still keep your lineup live. It's nice to have injury insurance policy because, let's be real, sports is physical and a lot of folks get hurt. And PrizePicks always wants to put its members first. That's why they also make sure that all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. So when my picks get hits, I can get my money in as quickly as 15 minutes. And of course, it's offered in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas, which makes it very accessible. Lots of folks getting in on the action. And of course, you can even play PrizePicks alongside some huge celebrities like Drewski, Joe Budden, and Sean O'Malley. You can find them under the community plays, under the promo tabs of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the PrizePick community every week. So if you're ready to get started, download the app today and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code Locked On NHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's closing thoughts as we are just wrapping up really quickly with, a short little thing. Obviously, the Penguins are coming in this weekend, and it's tough because we're not going to have Rucker McGroarty. That's going to be a bit of a frustrating departure, but, well, we'll just have to wait to see him another time. Now, I did mention the Penguins' offense has actually been pretty decent this year. In fact, by top-down hockey, they are ranked like second or third in terms of expected goal creation, which obviously a very small sample size, but I think it does show some credence to the fact that this team is deeper than it's been in previous seasons. The top line of Beauvillier, Crosby, and Rust, that's a traditional combo between Rust and Crosby, but Beauvillier, I guess, is decent. I know he's a guy that the Jets at one point probably had some modicum of interest in, but I think the biggest thing is that Crosby just continues to be Crosby, right? At his best, he is still one of the truly elite players in this league. And look, he is getting older. He's had some big milestone points in games recently, but, wow. Crosby just seems like the ageless wonder. And then your second line of Bunting, Malkin, and Raquel is apparently getting it done. Malkin seems like he's turning back the clock a bit. I think for a while it kind of seemed like Malkin might be a bit washed, but I don't know. Sometimes he just has these well springs and these moments of youthfulness that remind you why the 1-2 punch of Crosby Malkin used to just run the Metro Division for many years. These guys at their best are just absolutely lethal, and having a decent supporting cast probably doesn't hurt. On the third line, you've got O'Connor, Eller, and Puljujarvi. Obviously, O'Connor's kind of filling in for where McGroarty was earlier, but Puljujarvi, I think, is really the find here. Yessa has been, ever since his return, just a beast. I don't know if he's really ever been fully appreciated for the sort of player that he is, he's just a chance creation nightmare. The guy is big, tall, strong, skates really well, and attacks the crease. The only thing, again, kind of like Lowry in some ways that he missed was just the finishing touch, but it just seems like he's been a really versatile menace this year. And as a third liner, a nearly perfect, ideal winger to have. He forechecks well. He creates good chances. He actually has chipped in a few points here and there, if I recall correctly, but just a really impressive start to his season. In preseason and camp, he looked renewed and refreshed. And if there's one player that I really root for, Puljujarvi is probably one of them. He just seems like a really nice guy, a really fun player, and I don't think he's ever really had, the full fair chance that he's truly deserved. Then you've got a fourth line of Hayes, Glass, and Nachari. Seeing Hayes on a fourth line in the year 2024 is a little bit strange. I remember when he was, the Jets stint was fun, right? But Hayes, Glass, and Nachari have apparently been pretty decent. Glass has maybe not really developed into the sort of player that I think Vegas or some of his previous stops wished for, but for the Pens, he's been a great fourth-line center, and perhaps that's all you really need from him at this point. Like, they've got pretty good center depth. They're not really hurting up front, so overall, a pretty deep team. Then on defense, you've got Grzelcyk and Letang, Pettersson and Carlson as your second pairing, and Graves and St. Ivany on your third pairing. Or Ivany, is it Ivany maybe? But this blue line, I think, has had some issues recently. Pettersson has in particular struggled, and I think it's also been hurting Carlson a bit. But, all that said, this Pens team offensively still a juggernaut, right? Like, they just know how to create tons of chances. And even the blue line, which is definitely still struggling and, not getting a lot of backing from Jari or Blomqvist. All that said, still a team that's going to score like the Dickens, and you just don't really want to give them power plays. The puck movement on their top power play unit's really scary, and we all know that, Crosby and Malkin together is just a recipe for goals. So Winnipeg really needs to stay out of the box and be very careful in this game, but we'll have to see how that pans out. I know that this is still a very tough opponent and a team that, the Jets just really shouldn't sleep on. But The Jets have played pretty competitively against the squad before, so we're hoping that even without a McGroarty drive to really go the distance, the Jets still put on a good show. But give me your score predictions below for these two games. I think tomorrow's game, I would say 4-2 Jets, and Sunday's game, maybe 4-3. Do I want to say Jets, 4-3 Jets maybe? Yeah, I'll say 4-3 Jets. I think those are my two score predictions. Drop your predictions below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Bonus points if you actually guess how many 5v5 goals the Jets score. But joking aside, we'll have to just hope that it's not all on special teams. But for tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you tomorrow with some recap action of Winnipeg versus San Jose. But for tonight, that's all we've got. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.